Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go around is Tawny Lara. She is a child of two worlds, I would say. One is a rock and roll California kid, and the other is a journalist from my ultra-conservative hometown of Waco, Texas. Somewhere in all of it, she lost herself in the bar scene and honestly didn't find her way back out and back to writing until she literally dropped everything and moved to New York City without knowing a soul there. Pretty crazy. She's now the proud parent of a new book called Dry Humping, which you should go and pre-order, or if this is later and you're listening to this, you should just go and purchase it. Audiobook soon to come as well. And she is also the podcast host of Sobriety Rocks. I'm willing to bet you can tell what it's about from the title. Anyway, I love seeing this kid spread her wings. And I hope you enjoy this chat with Tawny. Tawny, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast.
Hola, so good to be here. Good to see you again. And
so many greetings at once. I don't know which one to respond to. Yeah,
all of them.
Oh my goodness. So I don't usually give any preamble, but I'm gonna say a little thing here. You and I go way back and way back. I grew up in Hewitt, and you were kicking around in that part of the neighborhood. But I wanted to tell you a little story in the beginning. So my wife, Christy, I don't know if you know this or not, but when we had our second kid, she went to the hospital, almost didn't come out, right? It was really rough. Blood clot in her leg, had to learn to walk again. She's a badass and unstoppable. So of course she's kicking around doing everything like a normal person now. But part of her rehab is she had to figure out something to like get her moving again. So she started going to the gym. She tried a bunch of stuff. None of it really stuck. She tried Zumba. It was boring. She didn't like any of the instructors. They just, I don't know, just wasn't doing it, you know? And then we happened to be in Hewitt, back right where our family lives. And we went to your gym, to one of your classes. And that was, what do you call that? A watershed moment, inflection point for her. She said, this is what I want. She's like, I want to do this every day. Because it is so much fun. It is such a blast, but there's nothing like it. So right after your first class she did with you, she said, all right, I'm going to become an instructor and I'm going to teach this stuff. So literally that is what has changed the entire trajectory and why she is like a fitness instructor and all that stuff. So if nothing, little Tawny from Waco has made such a huge impact on our family and our happiness and well-being. And I wanted to share that story with you before we got started.
Thank you. That is the coolest thing, honestly, the coolest thing to hear. And I had a similar experience when I took my first Zumba class. I was like, this is what I've been missing. And I became an instructor, you know, like it was such a huge part of my life. And I met so many cool people. Like you know, you guys came, we had like our own little community, like our own little Zumba family. And, we all come from different parts of walks of life and came from different parts of Waco, but we came together to exercise and have fun and just kind of forget all the shit going on outside. And it was just a really special time. And I remember I always loved that you came with Christy, you know, because so many men just would not. I mean, you know, toxic masculinity has historically been a thing. And you were just like, no, my wife loves this and I'm going to come. And you must have had fun too.
For sure.
Yeah. Like, you know, and it gave me hope to see. I was like, wow, like Christy found a guy who's like really sweet. He does this kind of stuff with her. And that I had never seen a man show up for his wife like that before. So like that meant a lot to me. And I you know, we'll get to my sobriety journey, but like I met my partner in sobriety and he shows up for me and, you know, so thank you for showing me like what a good guy looks like.
Well, I like to say I'm abnormal. As I've progressed in life, I've learned that my brain doesn't operate like most people. So it's like, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But
I think it's working the way that it should.
I think it works in it benefits me a lot in many ways. I will say that. But
yeah,
let's do my traditional intro. In that, whenever I run into somebody, I like to, and believe it or not, I do this in real life, and I find out who my people are pretty quick. And I say, once I learn their name, we chat for a second. I say, well, who are you? I just love saying that. Tell me who you are. Who are you? So Tawny, who are you?
Well, because I'm promoting a book, I will say I am the sober sexpert, author of Dry Humping, a guide to dating, relating, and hooking up without the booze.
Dang. Look at that. Just rolled right off your tongue. It's like almost like you practiced that a couple times. So you are an author, dude. Like when I met you, little Tawny shaking her stuff, author wasn't something that immediately popped to mind, which I think is so cool. Was that like, where did author come from? Like at what point in your journey through life did that show up?
So actually you can see behind me. So there's my book cover, but framing it is these two blue, also framed pictures. They are newspaper clippings from the Waco Trib when I wrote for our local newspaper, the Waco Trib, when I was 14 years old. And I wrote what I now know are op-eds. I did not know. I just they were doing a call for teen contributors, and I applied and I got it. And I wrote about very controversial topics like legalizing cannabis and same-sex marriage, and at 14 years old in Waco, Texas in the year 2000. So no, I got a lot of literal hate mail that I still have to this day.
Oh, that's cool.
But the reason I backtrack so far is because around 14 is when I began to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, and I stopped writing. And when I was I would honestly say Zumba saved my life, because it gave me something positive and some positive energy, positive community outside of bartending. It gave me a community, something to do. It gave me confidence. It let me be creative. I got so much out of it. I was still drinking very heavily when I was a Zumba instructor. But I think it was the beginning of getting healthier, and I don't know that I would have ever gotten sober if I didn't find fitness first. And for me, that came through Zumba. But ultimately, I share all of that because I was writing when I was 14 and younger. I was always writing. And then, something really traumatic happened to me, and I started to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. And I did that from 15 to 29, and then I got back to writing. And so it's like when I was teaching Zumba, writing was not part of my life at all, but that was my creative outlet at the time, Yeah,
I 100% understand what you mean. So like you're writing at 14, and so I'm 14-year-old Tawny. I'm writing. I really enjoy that. What gives me the gumption to decide I'm going to write for the newspaper? Like all these strangers are going to be reading my stuff.
Yeah. I think the gumption comes from, my mom and I were originally from Northern California, and we moved to Waco when I was 8. And my dad stayed in Northern California. So I grew up back and forth. Like I went back, I was in Texas and California a lot. So I think there was something about, and my dad's a heavy metal musician. So I knew that was an option. A lot of people growing up in Waco don't know that lifestyle is an option. And his mom, my grandmother, was an artist, a painter. So I knew I was surrounded by creativity, by art, luckily. I didn't have any interest in making music or painting, but for me, it was writing. And I think, you've met my mom. You did Zumba with my mom. She's a very outspoken woman. And so it's like, it's interesting. I was raised in Waco, Texas by a strong, opinionated feminist mom, so it was this very interesting dichotomy. And I think all of that resulted in the gumption that you're talking about of, well, my mom shares her opinions on things. I guess I can do that too.
Yeah. And for people listening, Waco is a very, I would say, a conservative bastion. So strong, opinionated females aren't easy to come by in that area. So yeah, the fact that you also share some of those qualities, maybe not as loud and in your face as your mom, perhaps, but you
just
still
different,
have
I guess. And I think I am my partner Nick. He says that like I am a true balance of like all of the good qualities of both of my parents.
Well, when you were writing, did your parents kind of foster that? Was that like encouraged, or was that just something you were like, I'm going to do this thing?
Yeah, they both were. My time in California, I would spend every summer with my dad, and he lived in, we were in Northern California and on the beach. And this is when the movie Harriet the Spy came out, and I was, I became Tawny the Spy, and I was like all like running around Alameda with my composition notebook and a raincoat, just taking notes, like, so-and-so's wearing this, so-and-so's talking about, like, I don't know. I would pay big money to see what those notebooks actually said. But I don't remember this, but my dad said that I had a sign on my door that said, do not disturb Tawny the Spy at work. So he, and he indulged me, and he also one summer he and I actually wrote a song together, and little 8-year-old me recording vocals, like, it was like, you're allowed to have a bad voice and it's cute when you're 8. We couldn't do that today. But that was, so like, I was always surrounded by art, like I was saying. And then, my mom was obviously very supportive of me, using my voice. She encouraged me. I was like, I want to apply for this. What do you think? And I applied and I got it. And I was also doing, in high school, I was doing broadcast journalism, doing the morning announcements. And I was always interested in finding the story,
That's interesting. Something that popped in my head as you were saying your dad always indulged you. And I was thinking somebody who's like in a heavy metal band probably is still somewhat in touch with that childlike part of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure he could, because I've noticed as I age, that's like being able to connect with my kids on like that imaginative level sort of has drifted away from me. And it makes me feel sad sometimes thinking about it.
Maybe you should start playing heavy metal music.
You think so?
I think that's what we're getting at here. I think this is the segue of you becoming a thrash metal bass player.
I don't know, if you look at the aesthetic I'm rocking right now, maybe playing banjo in like a country band would be more aligned with, or maybe like swing music or something with this mustache. It's kind of
maybe like a banjo swing metal hybrid. I
appreciate your enthusiasm towards it. I really don't think
I think that's ska, actually.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, we've definitely gone the wrong direction then. Let's pull up. Where'd a nosedive? Oh my gosh. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. If you like ska, you like ska. I'm not going to yuck on your yum.
There we go.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. You can continue to live in 1997 as long as you like. So you're doing all this writing. Some stuff shifts for you, and this sounds like, we earlier talked about an inflection point. I guess this would be an inflection point for you. So you started numbing, I guess.
I did. Yeah. I went through some shit and I started self-medicating, numbing. I didn't have the language, the vocabulary, the emotional regulation. I didn't know what the hell I was feeling.
Yeah, you're a kid.
When I was a kid, and my parents, as supportive as they were also, they had me when they were very young and they hadn't quite worked through their shit yet. So I I was not in the best environment, and self-medicating is what got me through. So now I know exactly what was going on. I know that I was experiencing, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and of course I was smoking a bunch of weed and drinking and popping pills. Like, of course I did that. Like, I was desperate to just escape. Now I have that language. Now I have those tools. And ultimately, that's why I got back into writing when I quit drinking, was because I really wanted to create those tools that I wish I had when I didn't even know that I wanted them or that I needed them, So, and we're in a different landscape now where, now 14-year-olds can get on Instagram and read about anxiety and depression. That was not what was happening in 2000. So yeah, that's really how I turned a whole bunch of lemons into lemonade, if you will. And it's been November will be 8 years that I've been alcohol free and in recovery. So
that's solid. But your journey, and I think you could say this of most people, is not a linear path. It wasn't, I'll go to A, then B, then C. It sounds like it was something meandering. So we were in Waco, and I escaped, right? It's got a certain amount of gravity, and it took me a couple of orbits to actually,
that's real.
What did that achieve? Escape velocity or whatever? Get nerdy on
Yep.
you. But you just basically dropped the mic and you picked up and you moved your ass to New York City, right?
I literally bought a one-way ticket to New York.
That's crazy. Where were you at, in your head? How does that get there?
I didn't know a single person.
Kidding me?
Don't even know. But you know what I did? So after I graduated college and I moved to the Woodlands, north of Houston. I lived with my aunt there for a year. I didn't know what was next, but I knew I was like, I'm done with Waco. I don't know what's next. So I lived with my aunt. This is my dad's sister. I lived with her for a little, around a year. And during that time, I worked out a lot. I got a job outside of the bartending scene. I was still drinking, but I was significantly healthier because I got out of the bar scene. And as you know, the Waco bar scene is a lot. So so I was living in the Woodlands and living with a family member. I was able to save up quite a bit of money and I traveled quite a bit. I had my uncle and his husband, they were living in Germany at the time. So I went to Germany and they took me to several surrounding countries. And I actually spent a couple days alone in Paris to visit Jim Morrison's grave and hang out there for several days. And I don't know if you're into astrology, but this is like the Saturn return because it takes Saturn 28, 29 years to go around the sun. So they say that your Saturn return, it brings these really big shifts. A lot of people have these really significant life moments between 27 and 29. So I was very clearly in mine. And when I got back from my Euro trip, I was just like, fuck this, fuck Texas. I can't do this anymore. And I bought a one-way ticket to New York. Because my lifelong dream has been to write for Rolling Stone magazine, and Rolling Stone's in New York. So I was like, I guess I'm moving to New York. There was something about leaving Waco, leaving Texas, seeing 6 other countries, just experiencing other cultures and other people. I was like, wow, there's so much more to this world. I'm next, what's next, and so I'm still yet to be published in Rolling Stone. It will happen one of these days. But that was the impetus I was like, okay, I'm moving to New York. And I did. And I've been here since the summer of 2015.
That's wild. So it sounds like it sounds like you were primed. The time was right. The dominoes were set up, and this trip to Europe really gave you some perspective. Because I've learned that a lot about myself too. It's like the more people I surround myself that are different than me, honestly, the smaller I feel on this planet. Like there's so much more I need to learn and grow, and I wish that for everybody, that you can live in a different place for a little while, even if it's just for a couple of weeks. You know what I mean? To like really submerge yourself in a different culture, because it's so crazy how quite literally everything that you do normally is foreign, right? And so everything they do is absolutely foreign to you. And just I've noticed a lot of older cultures are so much friendlier and kinder to each other, and they have kind of this village mentality, and I absolutely love that. Like, we had a opportunity to go and stay with a friend in Australia when he was getting married, and like his family took us in, and like we were one of theirs, and then they stuck us with the neighbors. These people didn't know us from Adam, and they just like took us in as their own. I was like, that was a very humbling experience to see, just kindness, just being kind to all these other people. And would love to hear.
Did your kids get to experience that too, or was it just you and Christy?
It was just Christy and I. They were still pretty little, and doing a trip to Australia wasn't exactly on the top of my list of these little knuckleheads.
That's like over a day of travel.
It was
just to get there. Yeah.
It was a lot.
That's so cool that you guys got to experience that, though.
For sure. But tell me about being in Germany versus, well, also Paris, because I'm sure Paris by yourself, I'm sure you did a lot of introspection, and you were talking about
that was insane.
Jim Morrison's grave. Yeah, I know you're a rock fan.
Yeah, I mean, I still can't believe I literally just went to Paris alone for 3 days and hung out at his grave. And I remember, like, I would send my aunt pictures, my aunt that I'm staying with. She was like, there's a lot more to do in Paris than just hang out in a graveyard. And I was like, this is why I came here. So I was staying in a hostel, and I met other, young single people, and I found these girls that are actually like, they're from the Boston area, and they were studying abroad, and they had a weekend in Paris, and we just happened to be hostel mates. So we spent the day together, and we went to the Louvre and did some fun touristy stuff that I probably wouldn't have done. But I remember when I took the train from Germany into Paris, I get off the train and I'm like, why the fuck did I do this? Like, I don't know any French. I don't know. Like, why did I think this was a good idea? But I figured it out. I don't know. I figured it out. But I think that is ultimately what gave me the courage to move to New York, is, again, I figured it out. Like, it was like, I guess if I can hang out in Paris without speaking any French, I could probably do New York. New York's a lot easier. And I did. And I am.
Yeah. So when you look back at Paris, it doesn't feel just fun or special, but it sounds like it feels important. Like it was an important step.
Very important. That whole trip, like, everything is all the countries are so small there. So I was able to go to like 6 or 7 countries in like 2 weeks. And it was very easy to do because it's all connected by train. Like you said, just learning about other places, meeting different people, hearing different languages. It really, like you said, like, I felt smaller, and I liked that. Like, it's like one of my favorite Chili Peppers quotes from Snow, the more I see, the less I know. And it was one of those kind of moments where I'm like, wow, I don't know anything. Like, the world is so much bigger than, Waco and California. Like, what else is there? And since I've traveled to many places and had, I did yoga teacher training in Bali, spent over a month there, and that was just such a cool experience to be somewhere else for that long. And I don't know why I'm just talking about travel now.
No, to me, it's important because these things, I feel like when you're in the grind, you're in the rut, growth is possible for you, but it's not readily available. It doesn't happen fast. But I feel like when you transplant yourself to a new place and a new culture, there's so much growth that happens in you as like a person, as a human being, that to me, it just feels so special and important.
Even just learning, like for me, learning public transportation, like in different parts of Europe and riding the train throughout Paris. Like, I was like, wow, this makes so much more sense. Like, why do we drive cars everywhere? The trains are so much more efficient, cheaper, faster. Like, that's one of the many things I love about living in New York now is I haven't driven a car in 8 years, and I don't, like, anytime I hear someone talking about car stress, I'm just like, wow, I literally forgot that is a thing, like, that you have to deal with. I have not thought about car insurance or gas or changing tires or oil changes. I haven't, like, that's just foreign to me at this point.
All right. So it's 2015. I'm Tawny, and I've decided I'm going to move to New York. Do you like go on the internet and like find a place to live, or do you literally just get a plane ticket and you're like, I'm going to figure it out when I get there?
So a little bit of both.
Okay.
I was a very naive 29-year-old. I get on roommates.com and quote unquote find a roommate, which was a scam. I wired a stranger $1,000, and that was my first New York experience. I hadn't even gotten here yet. So that's why I said, fuck it, I'm just going to buy a ticket and figure it out. That made way more sense. I was like, I just need to be there. And I'll meet people. And that's exactly what I did. I got into a 2-week creative writing intensive at NYU. And it was, so for those 2 weeks, I was able to stay in a dorm. So that's why I was like, should I go out there for a couple weeks, then come back and then like maybe set up? And I was like, no, fuck it. I'm just going to buy my one-way ticket. I'll meet a roommate in the program or something. And I did. I did. I met a roommate, and if I met lots of other people like me who just, New York, LA is filled with people that are just sold everything and have a dream. Like, as corny as that sounds, like that's just, I met actors, writers, painters, like just these crazy artists who sold everything to pursue this tiny little idea,
I think that is amazing. So you went down there for creative writing. So was it before Europe? Was it after Europe that you're like, you know what, this writing thing, this is me. I'm going to do this. Like, at what point in the mix did that come in?
When I left Waco, and also when I finished college, I had a lot more headspace. I graduated college late, around 28. And I got back into writing because I wasn't doing homework anymore. So I started to write, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is what I do. I just haven't done this in a really long time, but it felt so, I was like, I missed this. I am a writer. And so I, read some books about writing and all of that. But ultimately I was like, I want to take classes. And I bought an issue of Poets and Writers magazine. It's, this is funny. I went to Barnes and Noble to buy the new issue of Billboard magazine because Jack White was on the cover. And then I found out that Billboard is subscription only. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to get some magazine while I'm here. And I was called to this Poets and Writers magazine. And I bought that, and that's where I learned about the NYU writing program. And I found out like the deadline to submit was like in 2 days. And I was like, shit. So I just stayed up all night and I wrote this horrible draft of something, but I got in. I think I got in because they needed bodies. I don't think the piece was that great. And I'm not just like being I know my writing at that point in my life, it was not that great. But it was good enough to get into this class, I guess. So that's ultimately how the whole NYU thing happened. And that was such an incredible experience. It was just 2 weeks of writing 5 days a week, like 8 to 5, writing classes, lectures, authors came to speak. Like, it was really cool.
Did it feel right? Did it feel like this is where I need to be? This is where I'm supposed to be?
It felt right, but there was this air of imposter syndrome because I was the only journalist, and I didn't even know I was a journalist at the time, I guess. But like it was a creative writing intensive, so it was mostly like memoirists and novelists and that kind of writing. And I was like, I had hot pink hair at the time. I feel like that's an important detail. I was like this hot pink haired girl that just moved from Waco wants to write for Rolling Stone. Like, I was definitely the only person there with that goal. But it was still writing, so I still got so much out of it, and ultimately helped me with, the book and all the other writing that I'm doing.
So you go there for 2 weeks, you find a roommate at some point, and you just make it happen, huh?
Make it happen, get a day job and do the grind, work a bunch of jobs and figure out like what you do to be a writer and do that. And I just figured it out.
The pull to be a writer is so strong with you. And you said you started saying felt, and then you didn't finish your sentence. So I'm curious, what's the feeling it gives you when you're writing?
It's a good question. You know how when children ask why, like when they get to the age when they can ask why, and like everything you say, they still want to know more. Mm-hmm. I never grew out of that. And so for me, being a journalist, I get to ask why for a living. And I get to ask why of my friends and family, of people that I interview, of experts, of society, of culture. I get to really ask these questions so I can, I guess the answer is that writing and asking why helps me make some sense of the world.
To ask why. I like that. Something I learned when Christy and I were wedding photographers, believe it or not, we did that as well. We've done a lot of things. We've done a lot of things. But that was when I was especially socially awkward and anxious, and I didn't like crowds. But when I had this magic camera in my hand, everybody was your friend. They would all do, like if I asked them to do something, they were totally cool. And it gave me permission to interact with these people in a way that I normally would be so uncomfortable with. And I was just thinking, if you are a journalist and you get to ask why, it's like this little superpower, so that you get to ask why for a reason. You're not just being some weirdo, you actually got a purpose going.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. That's exactly what it is. And I can see how the camera can definitely help with that. And it gives you like, you're there for a purpose, like you're working, but you can kind of shoot the shit with people a little bit, but it's also like, it's very low pressure socializing. So I can see why that would appeal to someone with social anxiety. Yeah,
for sure. Do you feel like the journalism helps you connect with people? Like there's somebody over here that you would really like to talk to, but you don't necessarily have a reason or something like that?
Yeah. My partner Nick, he teases me sometimes because like I can't turn off being a journalist. Like if he's telling me like a very unimportant story, like something that happened on the subway, and I'm like, I have so many questions about it. Like I'm like, yeah, but what were they wearing? Which direction were you going? Which train was it on? And he's like, this doesn't matter. Like, you're not writing an article about this. I just want to tell you about this thing that happened. So it's like he lovingly teases me, about that. And my friends are just, I think, used to it at at this point. And I've also had some I don't know, like headbutting, because sometimes I would ask questions and people don't like that they don't know the answer, or they don't like their answer, and it makes them feel uncomfortable, or and that's never my intention. But I think that's why I don't think people really understand what journalists do and like how important the job is to ask questions and to get the facts and then to report them, and it's like, it's hard to do. And I think it's so important for us to, whether you're a journalist or not, I think we should all just ask more questions.
Yeah. Communication to me has been the key of like every relationship I've ever had, or every relationship that worked, I should say.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah. That's the quickest way to kill a connection with another human is just to, not communicate your feelings adequately. But it's also, for me, it's sort of a weird thing in that I am completely transparent. Like, I will tell anybody anything at any point in time. So my brain says, oh, well, the opposite of that is true. So I can ask anybody anything. And so I've had to learn not to ask too strange a question too quick, right? You don't let all the crazy out at once, right? You just kind of, you slip it out a little at a time. But yeah, I definitely jive with people, and I tend to do that really quickly. I like big talk. Small talk doesn't really work for me, but I understand that small talk is a social contract, that we set this ground rule that I'm not going to attack you and vice versa. But it's so boring. I can't stand it. It kills me.
There's times that I appreciate small talk, like when I'm at the dog park and like just letting our dog, like, I like that there's people I see like 3 times a day and I don't know their name, but we know everything about each other's dogs, and like I like that. But there's also these moments of like when small talk is really annoying. Like, oh yeah, like Mondays, huh? I'm like, that's there's nothing else you could have said.
Yeah. Or it's hot out there. Bro, we live in Texas. Of course it's hot out there. It's like,
yeah,
duh. But yeah, like I've found an antidote to small talk. So when I find myself in those situations, I just ask a really weird question. Like, so if you had a superpower, would you rather be invisible or fly? Or, just so, if you had to wrestle in something, would you rather it be whipped cream or Jell-O? I don't know. It's just,
I love that.
Yeah.
What do people say to that?
It varies. It varies. It's always,
what you could also ask? You could ask people like what would be on their rider if they were a performer. Like Mariah Carey has to have like green M&Ms in her dressing room. Like, what do you need in your dressing room when you're preparing to perform at Madison Square Garden?
Answer that question, Tawny. What do you have on your rider?
Okay, you have to go first because I asked you.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought you were just kind of putting that out in the universe. What do I have on my rider as something? Because I'm going to perform.
It's on your rider.
And
yeah.
Okay. What do I have on there? I'm going to say you have to have, I need a big red float, and it's got, vanilla ice cream, and I want,
of course,
it cold. I want the can cold, but then I want to kind of stir it up so that it gets sort of melty. And then what else do I want? I want silk underwear, and I want to walk around in my dressing room.
Nice.
And that's it. That's all.
Hell
that's all I'll be wearing. Yeah. What's on yours?
I'm picturing red. I don't know, because
of course,
red silk with the big red float. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That way I can just be as sloppy as I want. You won't know the difference.
I love that. Okay. I think so. Mine is HEB tortillas.
That sounds like a guilty pleasure.
It's not guilty at all. It is a proud pleasure. My mom still sends me care packages of HEB tortillas. Like, I always have a steady stock in the freezer. When I go home to Texas, I fill my suitcase with tortillas, and TSA is like, what are you smuggling? I'm like, it's literally tortillas.
Oh my God. Did you ever on the suspension bridge throw tortillas?
I didn't. No, I know that was a thing.
You never did it. All right. Well, maybe you really aren't a true Wacoan. I mean, I don't know. I heard you moved there at 8, so whatever.
Yeah, but
California is invading the state.
Exactly. I was I guess I was in California during that, or I was just self-medicating when you guys were throwing tortillas. I was escaping reality.
Down. Yeah. Oh, we'll throw a little pity party over here, guilt you into it. Thanks, Mom. Good God. Anyway, I digress. So, you had mentioned your book. That was the whole thing that kicked off the author thing, and so it's all about being sober. And so, at what point did you become sober? Was that as you were in the airplane to New York and you're just, completely reinventing yourself, or where did that start?
Maybe that's where I got the idea. I moved here in June of 2015, and I got sober November of 2015. So I did not drink here for very long.
Yeah, just a few months.
It was just a few months. And I had this moment where I was in a pub in Soho, drinking with some friends after work, and we were all talking about how we don't have enough time to, fill in the blank why we moved to New York. Like, so-and-so doesn't have time to go on auditions. So-and-so doesn't have time to paint. So, we all were just kind of commiserating. And I don't have time to write, But something hit me when I walked out of that pub. I was like, I just spent 4 hours here talking about how I don't have time to write, but I was drinking. And it just something clicked. And the next morning I was like, I'm not going to drink for a week. I'm not going to drink for 2 weeks. And then my 30th birthday was coming up. And I was like, what if I just don't drink for a full year? And I blog about it. And so that's exactly what I did. I started a blog called sobrietyparty.com. And we didn't have the term sober curious back then, but that's definitely what I was. I was like, I don't want to give up alcohol forever, but I want to do this social experiment of what's going to happen if I don't drink for a full year. So I did that. And in that year, I wrote so much because the blog held me accountable, I connected with other sober curious friends. I was taking writing classes. I was in a very different headspace, and I started therapy. I just really started to take care of myself in a way that I never did before. And then I remember my 31st birthday was coming up, and one of my friends was like, are you excited to drink on your 31st birthday? And I was like, I don't think I'm going to drink. I'm not missing it at all. What am I missing? Why should I drink? Look at all these great things that have happened since I took a break, And then, so November 30th will be 8 years since I've had a drink. And it's been just life-changing, completely life-changing. I mean, it's been great, but it's also been really hard. Recovery is really hard. But it's 100% worth it. I mean, it's also hard to live in denial and binge drink and have hangovers every day and not treat your anxiety and depression. That's also hard. So I guess you just kind of have to figure out which lane of difficulty you're going to choose. And for me, I chose getting help.
I have 2 questions for you. One was, when you got started, were you just white knuckling? Were you just kind of hanging on to, was the pull really strong? And then 2, it sounded like it almost started like an experiment. In your head, you were thinking, I'm going to perform this experiment. And at what point do you feel like the switch flipped and you're like, this isn't an experiment anymore. This is my life now. Just kind of those 2 things.
I would say that's a great question. The experiment, I think, flipped when I started therapy, and I learned, because for me, like those first few months were like, it was fun. You know, I was like, I'm not drinking. I'm going to do this. I'm going to write about this. And it was like a fun thing. And then the novelty wears off and you go to therapy and you figure out why you use alcohol to drink. It's a lot to unpack and it's a lot to process. So that was really the pivot of like, I went into sobriety with the experimental attitude, the sober curious attitude, and then I realized I have some shit that I need to address. So it was really like, it was just really grounding, you know, and I would say humbling. It was very humbling. I was just like, okay, there's some stuff that I've not dealt with, and instead of dealing with it, I just binge drank and did drugs, and I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And then the first part of your question, no, I mean, I wasn't white knuckling. I didn't do AA. I kind of created my own program. Like I got really into yoga, therapy, like I mentioned, writing was a huge part of it. And then I eventually found a peer support group that worked for me, but I tried AA and it wasn't a good fit. But, I would say the early sobriety was like, quote unquote, easy because like I said, it was a fun game. And then, and then the reality settles and
Gotcha.
It's like,
so at first it wasn't necessarily like a dependence where your body was like craving it, you know, like calling
correct.
out.
Yeah,
to you. That's good.
I wasn't. And it's like, I love that question because I think it's important to acknowledge that you don't have to have this like cinematic rock bottom moment. You can just like, I was drinking until I blacked out like 2 or 3 nights a week.
Yikes.
Or I would go like, I could go like a month or 2 without drinking, you know? But when I drank, it was very destructive. And that was my problem. And for years, I thought I didn't have a problem because I wasn't drinking every day, you know? And I'm glad you asked that question because I want people listening to know that you don't have to lose everything to change your relationship with alcohol or a substance. You can change your relationship with it at any time.
Yeah. And, you know, I've noticed some people are different, you know, when they drink and they think, you know, this is who I am, right? This is how my peer group sees me. This is how my friend group sees me. You know, if I'm not doing this, who am I? You know, and it's, you know, a bit of ego death you have to go through, I suppose, in those respects, right? And that can be terrifying in and of itself. Like, who am I if I'm not the party girl or party guy?
It is. That's 100% in. That's why I said, like, once I started therapy and the reality hit, I was just like, wow, I've been wearing a mask this whole time. Like, I put on this performance and figuring out who I was outside of that performance was really difficult. And then, you know, ultimately that pairing that with dating and relationships and that kind of thing was so freaking hard. So like that's why I wrote this book, is because I had no idea how to date, let alone have sex without alcohol. You know, like it was like if I'm performing in like my daily life just as a human, like dating is like a joke, you know? So this is really the book that I needed when I was newly sober or even questioning my relationship with alcohol, you know?
Yeah. So I don't think everybody walks around calling themselves a sober sexpert. So was that
probably not?
Yeah, right. It's like I don't think, because I remember you saying you wanted to be in Rolling Stone, not be considered the sexpert. So that's a fascinating niche to find yourself in. And so I've been binging your podcast, and you're also a talented podcaster. I love listening to you. You keep things moving well. You have good questions.
Thank you.
I'm not here to build up your ego. It's already, you know, that's not what this is about. But I have noticed that, you know, you do touch on a lot of interesting subjects that I would have never even thought about. That's one of the things I really like here is that I get to peek inside of these little worlds that I don't know anything about because they have their own nomenclature, like sober curious and stuff like this. Like it's just so fascinating to see kind of this little world over here that I didn't even know existed. And I don't drink. I never have drank, so the idea of like trying to date without drinking is like, it's what I'm accustomed to. So the idea of how that could be so uncomfortable for people is sort of like a foreign concept to me. So it actually is, I guess, a curiosity to me. So I'm curious, what are the major hangups people have when they think, oh, I've got a date, but I've got to do it sober? Like, I think this, I've heard you, I'm teeing you up, dude. I know the answer for a little bit, right? Because I think you referred to it as liquid courage, right? And so just tell me a little bit about that and how that all kind of ties together.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is, the thesis of this book is how to replace liquid courage with intrinsic courage, like really getting to know who you are outside of alcohol. So, and in the book, I talk about pop culture tropes, how liquid courage shows up on screen, and then how that also impacts us as humans, in general, but specifically when it comes to dating and relationships. There's this, for me and for a lot of the people that I interviewed, this reliance on liquid courage, which is, just relying on a drink looking at this drink as this magical elixir who's going to make you more fun, more outgoing, more uninhibited in the bedroom, more social, all of these things that people often rely on alcohol for. So it's really this exploration of liquid courage and reminding readers, like, chapter 1 is literally called Dating Yourself. It's like, it's how to get to know who you are without liquid courage, without alcohol, because you can't have a healthy relationship with someone else unless you know who you are and you learn how to love who you are. Like, I'm not the first person to say that. That is like a timeless cliche, but I write about that cliche through the lens of liquid courage.
I think it's a cliche for a reason, because it is so absolutely true, and something I found is this happens to me so common. It's something I logically know and understand, but until somebody says it in just the right way to kind of snap that puzzle piece into my brain, it never clicks. And so it's so funny how you may be saying the same thing 1,000 people have already said, but you say it in such a way that it really resonates with me, right? It hits me in a different way. And so I think it's always so amazing when people take the time to, put their story on a page or put themselves out there, because it's not exactly easy to be vulnerable with the subject matter that you're talking about. I think that's really dope.
Thank you. It's like I said, it's like, this is the book I needed when I was newly sober and had no freaking idea how to date, be in a relationship without, I didn't know how to do anything about alcohol, like friendships, family gatherings, like it was just, everything seemed to be just so boozy. And because of the circle I was in, but it was time for a change. I made that change, and that's I write a lot about in the book too.
Once you got sober, did you lose any of your old friends or some of your family? Like, I don't know who this Tawny is anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting because I moved first. I moved before I got sober. I don't know that I could have gotten sober if I stayed a bartender in Waco, realistically, So the friends that I grew apart from organically just because we weren't around each other anymore. But I did have some people that were in my bartending scene that read my blog and just shit all over it. They were haters, and I think because for a lot of times, sobriety can be a mirror for some people, and people treated it like, well, if Tawny quit drinking because she says she had a drinking problem and I drank as much as she did, then does that mean I have a drinking problem? And like, it can be very confronting when someone gets sober, especially someone that you drank heavily with gets sober. So now I know that that's most likely where some of the haters were coming from. But at the time I didn't, and I was really hurt by it. I was like, why would you say these mean things? Like, why would you say people said I was making it up. People said I'm not really sober. People said I didn't really drink that much. I'm just like, there's nothing, that's where they were, they were not in the place to receive what I was writing about, and that's fine. Now my skin is a lot thicker, and I don't let those things bother me as much. But it is a very common thing that people deal with in early sobriety, especially if they're getting sober in their old friend group. Like, it's so hard to make new friends. As an adult, it is so hard to date without alcohol, which is why a lot of people keep drinking, because the unknown can feel really scary. But I promise you're not if you're listening and you're just like, how am I going to make friends without alcohol? Like, you will. I promise you will. That's why peer support groups are so freaking important. Even if you're sober curious, I think having therapy or peer support, someone to talk about this stuff with, is super helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know people who are their own worst enemy. So when they're concerned about something, it just spirals in their head. And getting literally out of your head and having it come out of your mouth and with another human can be so helpful. Thankfully, that's not one of my many maladies, but I know people who are like that, and it sucks. But yeah, I could definitely understand almost like the existential crisis or fear of, if I become this other person, how are people going to perceive me? And yeah, so I've been the sober guy for a really long time, my entire life. But I've been in sales for like the last 4 years now. And it's funny because whenever I'm meeting with clients, where do we always meet? Somewhere where you can have drinks. And, everybody's ordering their drinks. And I just say, I'll take an iced tea. Or I'll take a Coke. Or I'll take a water. And I've never had anybody question me about it. It's like, I'm not sure why people are so afraid of it, And in past, not with like those sort of like those customers or whatever, I never had anybody question, but I've had people ask me in the past, and it's just like say, oh, I don't drink, and that's it. And it's never gone any further than that. So, but then again, I'm a different, I mean, I don't know, maybe I don't have the friendliest face. I am kind of a big dude, so people don't tend to, give me grief or anything like that. So maybe it's different for different people, but I don't know, I never really seem to have a problem with it. I think
it's interesting to hear you say that, because it's like that's something that I came across in my research a lot. It was like, a lot of people just don't drink alcohol, like whether it's for personal reasons, religious, health reasons, medications. Like there's a lot of reasons to not drink alcohol. And those of us who've used this substance to self-medicate, for us, we can't wrap our heads around someone like you who never needed it. So, it's not that we needed it, it's that we felt like we needed it,
right.
And there is a lot of research that shows that most people that are in recovery from substance abuse have co-occurring disorders, meaning like they were self-medicating depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, autism. And once they got their diagnosis, then they realized, oh, that's why I was drinking. It's very, very common to get sober and then get a proper mental health diagnosis. Now, I've been officially diagnosed with anxiety. I take my Lexapro every day, and I'm a lot happier, a lot healthier. And most of my friends that are sober, very similar. They got diagnosed with something, they're on medication, and they're getting better now. And when I say there is this fear of the unknown of like mental health is so stigmatized that people often don't realize the correlation between substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and these co-occurring mental health disorders. And taking the time to dig into your own brain is not always appealing, especially to people who don't have the tools and the vocabulary and the resources. So it can just be way easier to just have a beer with your friends than to really thoughtfully examine why you want that beer, you know?
Yeah. It's something I've learned about therapy the hard way through people in my family is unless somebody wants to change, wants to put in the work, therapy's not going to do anything for you. So it's like you almost have to decide, I want to do this thing, this time is right, you know? And it seems like everybody I talk to that, I don't know, that little spark that got them there is different, right? Which sucks because there's no like formula, there's no playbook you can follow to get somebody there or help somebody there. It just sometimes, I think earlier you said that, God, what was it? You'd walked out of a bar and just decided, you know, I wasted all this time. You know, I don't need to do this anymore, right? It's like everybody's story is different. I mean, they may have similar patterns, but they're different. And it's like, how do you find that spark?
Yeah. And I tried to cut back on drinking and quit drinking so many times before that moment. But it's like, for me, I needed to really pause and reflect on, like, I got really present with the fact that I spent 4 hours talking about how I don't have time to write. like for that reality really hit me, you know? And it's different for everyone. It might be, you know, a lot of people get sober for their kids, you know, like they're like, I've missed so many practices because of my drinking and I just can't do this anymore. Or being helping out with their parents, caretaking for loved ones, or wanting to go back to school. Like there's so many reasons, but whatever the reason is, it ultimately has to be because you want to be healthy. You know, you have to want to be better. You can't get sober for someone else. Like your children can be the reason that you want to be better, but you ultimately have to be better for yourself. And that is something that we're not taught. We don't know that inherently, and we're not taught that in school. So unless you just happen to read an article about it or have parents who are into mental health, how the hell are you going to know that?
I know. So much of that stuff is like a mystery that's, you know, it's almost like a legend or, you know, a myth where it's passed from person to person. And if you just don't happen to talk to the right person, how are you going to get that? But you said the buzz phrase of the last few years in mental health, and I think that gets a lot of overuse, a lot of lip service. But yeah, I think with people who've really brushed against it or understand what it can look like, I mean, like suicide rates for people, you know, kind of, you know, 19, 18 to 30 right now, it's crazy. It's crazy. Like how many people we're losing. Like, what do you call that? Like a permanent solution to a temporary situation? Yeah. It's tough.
It's permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, it's an epidemic. I mean, and it's also, it's quite problematic in Texas, particularly. So far this year, I've had 5 or 6. It's sad that I have lost count. 5 or 6 friends that have died either from taking their own life or substance abuse, you know, like unintentional overdose, cirrhosis of the liver. You know, these are people my age,
Golly.
like 40 and under, that have died because of their mental health. And I was in a really dark place processing all of this naturally. And I was just like, why is this happening in Texas? Like, what is going on? And also my generation, why are so many millennials self-harming, and why is this happening in Texas? And I learned that Texas mental is basically a mental health desert. There's a significantly disproportionate rate of people who want help for their mental health and resources for the mental health. So Texas needs significantly more therapists, more social workers, more psychiatrists, and more substance abuse counselors. There's just not enough. So that's one part of it. But there's also, I'm sure there's a lot more, but these are the two I've come up with, is that, and then also that, in Texas, you're just taught to pray it away and your problems will be solved, instead of giving someone tangible solutions to take care of themselves. So those two things alone, and I'm sure there's significantly more, are literally killing people.
Yeah. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you said pray, and it made me think pray the gay away. A lot of our LGBTQIA plus kids down here are really getting crushed, and our conservative areas here don't really foster like care and compassion for those people. And, I've heard of places where smart people are leaving, going somewhere else. They call that a brain drain. I don't know what the term is right now, but we're having like a social drain where I know people, literally people that are in that community that are leaving to go to states that are more friendly to their kids, right?
Yeah.
Or their family members and stuff like that. And it's like, what does that mean for everybody left here? It sucks. Like you said, it's becoming a desert, and it almost feels overwhelming. Like what can you do about that stuff? It's just terrifying.
Ultimately, what you can do is donate to nonprofits in Texas that are aimed to help. Donate to, the Trevor Project, which is an LGBT nonprofit. Volunteer. There are things we can do. And it's also like having these conversations with your kids, having these conversations with other parents. Like it sucks because you're in the position of like, do I just sit around and let these people say racial and transphobic slurs, or do I stand up and be the change? Like it's and I know it's really hard. It's a really tough place to be in, because the people that are saying these hurtful things, that are trying to that are actively harming the young LGBT community, aren't really trying to learn new things. They don't really care what you have to say. So you ultimately have to put your oxygen mask on first and take care of your kids, and that's really all you can do. But ultimately, as an ally, as a straight white dude, you also have to like do some uncomfortable shit for us too.
For sure, man. And that's what Christy and I do all the time.
Yeah.
My friend Adrian started a nonprofit down here. I'm going to go and plug her stuff. It's like pride100.org, I think. And so the idea is you get 100 people together in your small area, and you basically put together a bunch of LGBTQ, whatever letter under the rainbow it happens to be, like it's a nonprofit or a cause that will actually help you locally. And all those 100 people donate to that person, that charity, whatever it happens to be. And you do that 3 times a year. I think it's like,
I love that.
Cool, because it's helping me in my little tiny community. Maybe somewhere like in New York, that'd be a drop in the bucket. But in podunk town that I live in Texas, that's a huge thing, right? It can make a very big change. And so I love the idea of doing what you can, planting those seeds. To me, that's a big one, because so many of the little kids around here are inheriting these thoughts and feelings from their parents.
Yes.
And
I know. And like
being different, looking different.
Read books to your kids that are about different cultures. Like if you can't travel with your kids, read about different cultures. Like take them to different experiences. Take them to drag story time. Like let them see that like it like there's let them see and meet all different types of people, you know, like you don't even have to, like, I think that's something that my mom did really well is, you know, she never used the word feminist. We didn't quote unquote talk politics, but she made sure that I was exposed to all of these different types of people. And I really appreciate that because I was able to come to my own political awakening and feminist awakening on my own, you know, whereas like if mom was saying the word feminist a lot, I probably would have had some like rebellion against it or something. So, and it really scares me. Like so much of my heart is in Texas. It really scares me that I really don't feel safe there when I go home. Just like being a bi person, being like all of my shirts usually have some political statement on them. And then I see these just horrifying posters and signs and bumper stickers. And I'm just like, wow, y'all still talk like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like, I think it's an important reminder to me because I can be in my own little echo chamber here. You know, I need to remember the most of the world is not like New York City, or at least most of the country is not like New York City. You know, I do need to remember what it's like to live in Waco or, you know, small towns where these kids are being surrounded by their parents' thoughts and mentalities.
Yeah. I mean, when you're surrounded by 1,000 voices saying something, even if you don't necessarily believe in it, you don't want to buck it, right? As like a little kid, that's scary, right? And I get that. But how do you just have to continue being, you know, a little source of change, right? Like kind of a beacon. So
yeah. I mean, it's like I understand if someone does not understand what it's like to be trans, someone who's never met a trans person, yeah, I can understand why like you might feel certain ways. If you've never met someone and had a conversation and seen that we're all just people, I can see why you might have some prejudice. Which is why I encourage, like, if you live somewhere where you don't have a trans friends, like watch TV shows with trans characters or read books with trans characters. Like they're out, like just expose as many different types of cultures as you can.
Yeah. Remarkably, they're human, just like you. And
believe it or not.
Oh,
yeah.
Gasp. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. And also, to that end, I don't have the want or energy to care about what anybody else is doing. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, I don't care. Why do people care so much? It's like, just let them live their life. It's like you're spending all this energy on this hate. Instead of spending this 4 hours on hate, you could be spending it on writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, there it is. Nice.
Pour it into your passions. Like put it somewhere where it'll actually be like useful or beautiful for the world or anything. Even if you're just like playing golf or playing cornhole in the backyard, I don't care. It's ridiculous. It takes too much time and energy. Anyway, I've diverged down a rabbit hole as I am wont to do. I love doing that stuff. But we were talking about your book. Let me bring it back to the book. So you have written your magnum opus. You're gonna publish this thing. It's pre-sale right now. You're recording the audiobook currently, right?
In a couple weeks, yeah. It's coming up.
All right.
It's on pre-order, and pre-order is, until I became an author, I did not know how important pre-orders were. But they help publishers know that there is a demand for the book, that helps them know how many to print. It also helps local bookstores know that they need to carry your book. If they get a bunch of pre-orders for a particular book, they're likely to order more and stock them. And the more pre-orders that a book gets, they're more likely to end up on a bestseller list.
That's cool. So is there a pre-order thing for your audiobook as well?
Yeah. So you could go to anywhere you get your audiobook. So if you do, Audible, you can you can look up either my name or the title of the book, Dry Humping, and just hit pre-order the audio.
All right, because like I told you earlier, you were like, "Oh, would you be interested in a copy of the book?" I said, "Absolutely not," because I never read
Yeah.
books. But if there is an audio version, I'm going to go and I'm going to pre-order the audiobook version here momentarily. I will definitely do that, and I will listen to that. I have no doubt I will enjoy it. That is so cool.
Yes.
That is so cool. So the book's going to come out. You're going to be a smashing success. You're going to help tons of people. You're going to get amazing feedback. They're going to ask you, they're going to beg you to write your Rolling Stone article. What's the next thing? Like, once you do that, what's the next thing?
I have a couple things that I'm working on that I will share more in a future date. But I really want, but for the sake of the book, I really want to turn it into a docuseries of some sort. That would be really exciting for me, because I think the subject of liquid courage and sober sex and dating are super important. Obviously, I literally wrote a book on it. But I'm also aware that some people just don't read books, and I want to use I want to talk about this subject as much as I can. So, I talk about it on the podcast, but it's like not necessarily the theme of the podcast is, me and one of my best friends, we co-host a podcast about recovery. It's not necessarily about sober sex, but it is about recovery. So I would like to see where else I can take it, like documentary, docuseries, maybe it becomes its own podcast kind of thing. Like that's something that my agent and I are working on.
That's cool. You're going to do a Netflix adaptation?
That would be the dream. Netflix, HBO,
Dude,
whatever.
so cool.
Like, yeah, just like, because there's so much research that I didn't get to put in the book. There's so much. And I have a weekly advice column called Beyond Liquid Courage, where people submit questions about sober sex and dating. So that's also available. You don't have to pre-order that. That's just now. You can just get it.
All right, Tawny. Well, we are right here at the end. So this is usually where I like to ask people, what would you, or rather, how would you have people interface, connect with the internet, anything you want to pump? Obviously, we want them to go and pre-order the book.
Yeah, pre-order the book. Please pre-order from a local bookstore. And if you do audiobooks, highly recommend looking into Libro, because 30% of every book purchase goes to the local bookstore of your choice.
Oh, that's cool.
So Audible is Amazon just does really not care about writers. They care about money. And I would love if you could pre-order from a local bookstore who people support businesses that do care about books, that do care about writers and amplifying voices. And you can also request a copy from your library. That's a fun fact. Audio and an ebook and the physical book you can request from your library. So yeah, I think just if you could pre-order Dry Humping, check out my column Beyond Liquid Courage, and on all of the social medias, Tawny Lara.
All right. And I know you've got tawnylara.com, and you've got a link tree on there. I'll put that in the bottom, right? Because that has all of the things, correct?
That has everything. Yeah, that's a lot easier. Like if I have events coming up, the column, how to pre-order, all of that, the podcast, everything.
All right. How about Instagram? You want people popping on that?
Yeah. Hop on.
Do the thing.
Yes. Tawny Lara for Instagram and all of the things. That's where I, if you want to know if it is urgent that everything that I am up to at on a daily basis, that is where you should go.
Well, and absolutely, of course it is. So everybody is going to surge there immediately.
It's the best place to be on the internet.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you, but okay. So, Tawny, thank you so much for taking this time. I actually, what's ironic is yesterday was the 4-year anniversary of us going to New York The first and only time we've ever been to New York.
Yeah, and then I saw you.
And you saw us. That was yesterday.
What are the odds?
So right there.
Oh my God.
That was us.
That was
randomly running into each other in New York City.
That is so freaking cool. Like that. I think you or Christy, did you say my name or did I notice?
I saw you.
You
fool.
guys? You saw me.
I saw
You're
that
like,
hair.
Tawny?
I saw that short tawny hair bouncing her way.
Yeah, the curls. That, it's so funny because it was in Times Square and I'm never in Times Square. And I was like, it was so cool. I loved that so much.
So it was kismet. It was meant to be that we were going to talk to each other today.
Yes, and I was supposed to be in Times Square on July 18th of 2019, apparently.
All right, let me hit stop on all this stuff real quick.